Newfoundland and Labrador tourism ain't got nothing on me. I have compiled 60 awesome things that you can do or see, places to go, things like that. But even with 60, I'm barely scratching the surface, so this is not a complete guide by any means. But it's the ultimate guide. I've never seen anybody put together anything quite like this, at least not on YouTube. I will say that I am numbering all of the different entries in this. This is not meant to be a ranking, though. This is just to help you index any of the particular suggestions I'm making. And if you need to come back and see the information again, you can kind of easily find it. I might suggest actually watching this video with a pen and paper if you're seriously using this as a guide to help prepare your road trip or your trip to Newfoundland. It might be handy to do that because it's just so much information. And I'm keeping everything at a very high level here to squeeze everything in. All right, with that said, let's just jump right into it because we have a lot to get to here. I'm starting everything off here with a category that I call challenges, because this is like a group of events put together that if you're on the island and you're looking for something interesting to do to get around and see multiple things or to see multiple places, these are little anchor points that you can use. Now, I'm not going to talk about fish and chips in this video because I've made 5 or 6 videos about that topic, but I've used that as like fish and chips restaurants around Newfoundland as anchor points to help get around the province. But there's a lot of other things like that you can use as well. So I'm starting off with lighthouses. Atlantic Canada, the East Coast in general, there's a lot of iconic lighthouses around. So if you're interested in lighthouses, you can travel around many different parts of the island and see some really cool ones. They often look different from one another, and one of the interesting things about lighthouses, of course, by nature, they exist to protect ships from slamming into rocky coastlines. So if you venture out to where lighthouses are, you'll see some of the most spectacular coastline areas of the island of Newfoundland. Now, when it comes to iconic town signs in Newfoundland, there's a lot of them. A lot of them have been popping up over the last little while. I don't know if it's a new phenomenon or it's just something I haven't noticed before. But you can travel around and just sort of make a note, see if you can find town signs. Now, I don't think they're everywhere. There's a lot of towns that have these cool little signs, and I particularly like them. I don't know if they're exciting for you, if they're boring, but they're pretty and they're unique and they just add something to your trip. You got the iconic dildo sign, which is kind of what sparked this in my mind. And then a lot of other places started putting up wooden ones, colorful, not colorful, whatever the case is. But if you're traveling around, look for them. And in particular, my 2 favorite signs are the 2 I Love Newfoundland signs that I saw on the west coast, one in Deer Lake at the airport and one at Port aux Basques, kind of just after you come off the ferry. But of course, they're a little different, but they still sort of fit into the theme of the town signs. Now, I grew up in Mount Pearl, and on the Avalon, riffs isn't a thing, but basically everywhere else around the island of Newfoundland, and I think there's 1 or 2 locations in Labrador as well, riffs is everywhere. And it's in the last 3-4 years when I've really been making an effort to travel around and see more of Newfoundland that I noticed that riffs is everywhere. And this isn't my idea. I can't claim to have created this idea myself, but I've seen it come up in stories in recent years where people have taken on the riffs challenge to get around and see and visit every single riffs location in Newfoundland. Now, if you're from the Avalon, riffs is kind of like Piper's, or if you're from somewhere else in Canada, you know, if you remember Honest Ed's in Toronto, or Army Navy surplus stores like Army Navy in Vancouver and Edmonton, the SAAN sign, I guess you would say it, in like rural Western Canada, it's a surplus Army and Navy, I think. Anyway, it's a type of store, it's a discount department store, but it's the type of store where you can get everything. And the fact that they are in maybe 20 locations around Newfoundland, in small towns, but kind of like in the service centers of different districts, right? So if you're trying to cover as much ground in Newfoundland as you can use riffs as your anchor points. If you're talking about exploring Newfoundland and trying as many fish and chips places as you can, or checking out all the lighthouses, or hitting up all the riffs, you're covering a lot of ground. But if you want to complete a little challenge but do it all in one town, the best example I can think of is go to Botwood, and you can try to find every single one of the beautiful murals that exist around town. There's not like any hidden or anything. It's not a huge town, but it does take a little bit of effort to get around and spot all of the different murals around town. And you can talk to the folks at the Botwood Mural Arts Society. I think it's Trudy Stuckless, if she's still the person who runs that. She's very, very helpful. You can get maps. You can actually do tours with like a guided tour during the peak tourism season. But even without that, you can still get around and try to see all the murals. It's not just for the sake of completing a challenge, but that the murals are really, really impressive and really sort of unexpected. So you go to Botwood, that's a challenge that you can undertake in one single town and do it in a single day. Now I'm segueing into a new category that is music, but I'm carrying forward the tradition of challenges. The first thing that I would suggest is you can do an all around the circle music challenge. It'll take a full day. You can go to Fogo, Twillingate, Morton's Harbour, and if you know, you know. Beyond that, we'll stay with some of the obvious stuff. If you're looking for live music and you're in the St. John's area, you can always hit up George Street for some excellent music. And if you're in town during the specific period of the George Street Festival at the end of July every year, you're really in for something unique and a really good party. There are so many amazing traditional Newfoundland songs that are about individual locations, and you can go and visit these locations, and it just sort of feels cool to do it. Starting, for example, with one of the most beloved Newfoundland songs, Let Me Fish Off Cape St. Mary's. Go to Cape St. Mary's. I'm going to talk about Cape St. Mary's a little bit more in another entry on this video, but you can go stand on the shores of Cape St. Mary's and look out into the water, right? Now this piece right here, this is a bit of a question for you. Do you recognize this wharf? This is a very iconic piece of a song. The song isn't about the wharf, but they mention Clayton's Wharf in my personal favorite Newfoundland song ever recorded, Saltwater Joys by Buddy Wass's Name and the Other Fellers. You can actually go to the actual wharf that Wayne Johnson sings about in this amazing song. Now in New West Valley, you have the town of Brookfield, formerly known as Norton's Cove, and you have Norton's Cove Studio. And I'll let the proprietor of the building who runs the studio now tell you a little bit about why it's such a significant location in the scheme of music in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Lukey's Boat was written by Virtue Kane, or Han, as she was born. Virtue would have been standing behind the counter on a daily basis right where I am. She ran the shop from its inception in 1890 up until her death in 1929. It was built as a general store, back in 1890. Virtue wrote the song and she performed it at the town hall in Brookfield, just right there. The hall is gone now, but when it was there, she was up there and performed Lukey's Boat. Lukey's boat is painted green,
I've created 4 or 5 videos about Twillingate, and one in particular about a very, very important resident of Twillingate who is kind of lost to history. Not really, but she should be more well known in my opinion. It's Mademoiselle Twillingate. Georgina Sterling. So you can go and visit the Twillingate Museum to find out who she was and visit her memorial site behind the museum where her remains lay. Just an incredible Newfoundland story that I'm hoping more Newfoundlanders will learn about and talk about moving into the future. One place that I'll say to go for a nice fish and chips is Denver's in CBS, and specifically in Kelligrews. Denver's fits into the music section because it's in Kelligrews, and Kelligrews, of course, the namesake of the amazing Kelligrews Soiree. There's a number of reasons to visit Fairland. One would be to visit the site of the Ron Hines Memorial. Sim and I was the group Sim and I, right? Sim Savory are from here in Bloor. Super famous for the Lumber Song, Music and Friends. There's a bunch. I mean, they're a classic Newfoundland group. But this is Sim's hometown, right? And last but not least, like one place I haven't been to yet, and as many times as I've been on the Bonavista Peninsula, I've never made it over to Tickle Cove Pond. Tickle Cove Pond being the namesake of one of my favorite Newfoundland songs. Wow. I gotta shift this. Get in there. Wow.
Well, it'll soon be time to wake up, guys. You're just dreaming.
There's lots of wildlife in Newfoundland. Whales are something that really stood out for me and my experiences. You can take whale watching tours, pay a few dollars, get on a boat and go out into the water, and the whales will come up and dance with you in the boats. You can stand up on cliffs in places like Twillingate and watch the whales down in the water below just doing their thing. It's amazing. Then you got seabirds. You got the Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve, which I briefly mentioned earlier in this video for the music section. The amount of birds, the cacophony of the song that you'll hear, it's just unbelievable to experience. And then of course you have places like Elliston, again down Bay Bulls where the whale watching tours are, where you have amazing puffin colonies, and you can get up close and personal with some of the most beautiful little birds that you can ever imagine. Wildlife in Newfoundland is really, really special. One note I'm going to mention is, for the love of God, be careful on the roads. There's a lot of moose in Newfoundland, and there's a lot of accidents, and a moose accident is not a good accident, so be careful, especially when it's dark at all. Take care on the roads, okay? There's no shortage of breathtaking sights to behold in Newfoundland. Starting on Fogo Island with Brimstone Head, one of the most unique rock formations that I'm aware of anywhere. You can hike to the top of Brimstone Head, which is known as one of the four corners of the flat earth, and relax by. It's just a bit of a joke, bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's pretty cool that they have that there. You can look down on the island from there, and it's really, really nice. You, of course, have the iconic fjords at Western Brook Pond in Gros Morne. I, for some reason, traveled out there in the winter, trudging through about 2 feet of snow. I was the only person in the vicinity of the place within miles and miles, but really cool place to witness. You have beaches in Newfoundland, and in my opinion, Lumsden Beach is the most beautiful beach I've ever seen. Now, I haven't been to Burgeo, and Sandbanks Park is supposed to be absolutely beautiful as well. But these are the sort of sandy beaches that you think of when you think of beaches. But you also have big sort of rocky pebble beaches like Topsail Beach, which is just outside the St. John's city limits. And it's not the type of place to sit on the sand and dig your toes in, but it's a place to bring some lawn chairs and bring your family and have a nice cookout on a nice summer evening. Beautiful, beautiful sight. Maybe not as comfortable as the soft sand, but still very, very enjoyable. Just outside the town of Bonavista, you have some really cool rock formations like the Dungeon and the Dungeon Provincial Park. And then just beyond that, you have Spiller's Cove Sea Stack. Again, they're really close to the town of Bonavista. Really worth the effort to just take that extra 10 or 15 minute drive to see these cool rock formations. And finally, the icon of icons when it comes to tourism in the spring in Newfoundland, it's the icebergs. The icebergs come through in the spring. They last some years right up until early summer, but it's amazing to see these huge chunks of ice that crack off from glaciers that were formed tens of thousands of years ago. There are a lot of memorials around Newfoundland, and these are not meant to make you sad, but if you want to feel something on your trips, you can check out some of these memorials. I'm going to start in the beautiful town of Harbour Breton. We have the Hickey Family Memorial. Please take a minute and Google the Hickey, the landslide in Harbour Breton from 1972, I believe. You can pay your respects at the site where the Hickey House once stood. Back on Fogo Island, you have the Great Auk statue, which is in fact a memorial. Even though there's no real signage at the site, there is a plaque just outside which explains the significance of the Great Auk. This statue is facing another Great Auk statue located in Iceland where a Great Auk also lived. They're long gone now, and we shouldn't forget what happened to them. The National War Memorial in St. John's is one of 2 National War Memorials in the country of Canada because it was unveiled when Newfoundland was its own country. Beautiful restoration took place in 2024 where they unveiled the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and it's an amazing memorial that many people kind of know something about because it's prominently located in the center of downtown St. John's. Not far from the National War Memorial is the Ethel Dickinson Memorial. This is something that kind of got a little bit of notoriety during the COVID-19 pandemic, and just as soon as we get past that, it seems like the Ethel Dickinson Memorial is just overgrown by bush again. This is a memorial to a nurse who gave her life to serve the sick during the Spanish flu. It is located in Cavendish Square, basically right across the street from the Newfoundland Hotel. So many people probably recognize the memorial itself, but they might not know what it is. Well, that's what it is. It's dedicated to a nurse from the early 1900s who gave up her life to serve the sick. Now, Bowring Park in St. John's is a beautiful park. It's my favorite park in the city, and there are a number of amazing memorials located within the park itself. A couple, like the Caribou and the Unknown Soldier statue, they're clearly related to the Royal Newfoundland Regiment of the First World War. You also have the Peter Pan statue, which is itself a memorial to Betty Munn, a 3-year-old girl who was part of the Bowring family who lost her life in the SS Florizel disaster, a boat that sank just off the coast of Newfoundland. Now, I have actually been on the site of a memorial dedicated to the SS Florizel on the southern shore, just in the town of Cappahayden. I never had the sense about me to actually shoot any of the memorial itself, but it does exist, and it's in the town of Cappahayden, just down the southern shore, past Fairyland, before Chipassi, so worth mentioning here for this video as well. Now, in the town of Elliston, again just outside the town of Bonavista, there's a beautiful memorial dedicated to Newfoundland sealers. There's a bronze statue created in the image of Albert, John, and Reuben Crew, a father and son that were on the sealing voyage that was disastrous in 1914, where they were actually found in this form apparently. So just a really touching memorial to see that the father and son, you know, and remember the sealers and the conditions that they worked in at that time. In the town of Badger in central Newfoundland, you have the Badger Memorial. This is a memorial to a police officer who was killed in the line of duty, and also to the loggers who were striking for better conditions. The conditions of workers in Newfoundland in the early part of the 20th century were terrible. So these men were fighting for better conditions, and unfortunately one of them took it upon themselves to crack a policeman over the head with a big piece of wood, killing him. So it was just a disaster all around, but the memorial is there. It's an important place for Newfoundlanders to visit and to remember this event. The Silent Witness Memorial just outside the town of Gander memorializes a plane that went down carrying American service members who stopped in Gander on a refueling stop coming from Egypt heading back to Kentucky around the holiday season. And there was ice on the wing. It's the first time I ever heard the term ice on the wing, but the plane came down shortly after takeoff, killing everybody on board. And it was a disaster that I remember as a young child. But you can go and visit the site, and it's a really moving place to experience, to actually have your feet on the ground in this place, knowing what happened here in 1985. In the town of Fleur-de-Lis on the Baie Verte Peninsula, there's a beautiful coffee shop, a little gift shop called Sam's Place. Sam's Saltwater Joy's Place, Sam's Place. This is a beautiful tribute to a young girl and a town that was devastated back in the year 2000. The reason why this is such an amazing place is the mother of the young girl has put everything that she had into this place as a way to remember her young daughter, and it's a beautiful place inside and out. This town was devastated by an unbelievably painful event that shook the family, but the whole entire town, a small town like this, when there's a tragedy like this, nobody's left unaffected. So for the mother and the town itself to create this beautiful place to honor this girl's memory and to keep her name alive, it's definitely a place that's worth visiting. I'm keeping this very high level, of course, because this video is so long, but please Google Sam's Place in Fleur-de-Lis to learn more about this story and what this place is all about. Now, Bell Island is a really, really unique place in Newfoundland, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Bell Island a little bit later, just sort of generally, but there's a memorial in the town that commemorates an event that most people in North America probably can't imagine, but there were boats offshore on Bell Island that were torpedoed by German U-boats during World War II. Bell Island was a major source of iron ore that was being used for the military effort, so German U-boats came to the coast of North America and torpedoed a couple of supply ships coming from Bell Island bringing iron ore for the war effort. So there's a memorial to witness there. When I was there, it looked like they were kind of doing some work on the place. It wasn't completely organized, but it's there, and it's probably been shaped up since I was there. So Bell Island, there's a lot of reasons to visit this place, one of them being the memorial to the victims of the U-boat attacks. In a place like Newfoundland, there are a lot of really interesting stories, and a lot of these stories were never recorded properly. There's not a great record of many of the most unbelievable events that have taken place in Newfoundland over the centuries. And this is just my opinion, but there's one story that stands out as the most significant, most amazing story that I'm aware of in all of Newfoundland history, and most people don't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it until the last couple of years, and I'm in my mid-40s. And that says something. This is a story that should be common knowledge amongst all Newfoundlanders. It should be a folk legend, and I just really don't think enough people know about it. For the sake of brevity for this video, as I said, I'm keeping everything very high level. I'm not even going to tell you anything about the story. I'm going to put a link in the description to a resource from a gentleman named Robert. He runs a really cool resource called Product of Newfoundland. It's a blog, and he has a YouTube channel and really cool Instagram page. He covers this in pretty good detail. It really makes you feel what happened. So I'm saying I'm keeping this brief and I'm talking on and on about it. I want to plant the seed. It's the Harvey family, Ann Harvey, her father, her brother, and her dog, Hairy Man, which in itself is worthy of being the most interesting story. What they did back in the 1840s, it's unbelievable that this is not common knowledge in Newfoundland. So please take a moment after you finish watching the video, complete the video, please. Go check that link in the description and learn more about Ann Harvey, what she did, and just be amazed. Now with that said, the Harvey gravesite exists in the town of Isle Morte on the southwest coast, and Ann herself isn't there. Her remains lie somewhere else. She moved to Port aux Basques after she got married, but she grew up in the town of Isle Morte with her family, and you can visit the gravesite of the Harvey family. It's such a cool story, and I just hope more people learn about this and remember the name Ann Harvey and the Harvey family into the future. Now, how can I have an actual category of communities in this video without covering 200 amazing places? Well, the ones that I've chosen for this video are very unique for one reason or another. So I have videos about the top 10 most beautiful towns, or the next 10 and things like that. So if you want to see more about towns, just go through my videos. But for this video, I want to highlight 6 communities that stand out for one reason or another. You have the town of Galtus, which is a town that is probably not going to exist in another decade or so from now, and if it does exist, it's not going to be serviced by government services, most likely.
Morning.
Going into Bonavista, Vista, I picked 3 towns to highlight because you can visit all 3 of them on one quick day if you're visiting the Bonavista Vista Peninsula. You have beautiful Trinity, which has received some serious investment in like infrastructure repairs over the years, so it's really something to behold. You have Champneys West, an active fishing community that has an active harbor. Mind if I get you in a shot? Yeah. Thanks. I'm all over the world. And it's the most beautiful little corner of the entire province. That's arguable, I guess, but it's one of the most beautiful corners of the entire province. And then you have Port Union. It's the only union-built town in Canada. I'm keeping this high level. Like I said, Google it. Port Union, Google William Coker and the FPU, okay? Very interesting towns. And as I just mentioned before, Bell Island has a deep history, not as long as many other towns in Newfoundland, but the boom and bust of Bell Island is something that should be studied. It's a town that is very easily accessible. If you fly into St. John's and you don't have time to get around and visit a lot of different places, maybe take a quick trip over to Bell Island. You can take the ferry and drive around and come back within a single day. But there's a lot to see. You have Dix's Fish and Chips, you have the lighthouse, you have the town of Wabana, the memorial that I mentioned earlier, just a beautiful place to visit. Very interesting place. And finally, I'm mentioning Stephenville, which is by far the biggest town on this group of communities. Stephenville, we'll see if anything happens now, but the potential for Stephenville to be completely overhauled in the next few years, are still holding on hope. To be honest, I'm kind of losing hope that any of the big projects that have been announced for Stephenville will actually come to fruition. But if it does, visit the town now to see what it's like before it changes, if it changes, hopefully for the better. I can highlight so many more, but just for the sake of brevity, I chose 6 buildings that stand out to me as particularly interesting. Staying in St. John's first is the Colonial Building, a historical building where so many interesting things have happened over the years. Before the Confederation Building was built, this was the seat of government in Newfoundland. So there's a lot of interesting events that have taken place at the Colonial Building. But just on face value, it's a beautiful building. So go see the Colonial Building if you're in St. John's. It's on Military Road. The Heart's Content Cable Station. It's a historically significant building that is related, of course, to the first transatlantic cable signal coming from across the Atlantic into North America. Heart's Content is a cool little town in any case, but if you're there, stop in and try to see the station. Every time I've been to Heart's Content, I try to get in, but it's always closed. I get there either on a Sunday or after hours, so the door's always locked. I haven't been inside the station, but just seeing it from the outside was still pretty impressive for me. In the town of Grand Bank, you have a very interesting looking building. It's the Fisherman's Museum. It's a couple of triangle-shaped buildings. It's a beautiful monument to the history of Newfoundland's greatest industry, the fishery. Overlooking St. John's is Cabot Tower, sitting high above Signal Hill. But Cabot Tower itself is a cool building with an interesting history that really, when it was built, probably shouldn't have been built. I'll leave that for another video. I'm very glad that it does exist, but it's just kind of one of those situations where at that time when it was being planned and built, there were far greater needs in the city. Think the Great Fire of 1892, but I digress. It's a beautiful building, and if you're in the city of St. John's, you're going to see it almost from anywhere you are. So now you know what it is. Now, I'm not really into creepy crawlies, generally speaking, but the Insectarium was a really cool experience. It's a place to go if you have kids. They'll have a blast there, most likely. It's basically a museum of bugs, but it's very well put together and very well built. I gotta say, I was impressed by it. I didn't really know what to expect, but there was more to it than I thought there was going to be, and they definitely did a really good job of putting this project together. Now, a little further down the west coast, just as you enter the Port-au-Port Peninsula, you have the Our Lady of Mercy Heritage Church. It's the largest wooden structure that still exists in Newfoundland. They've gone through some major upgrades recently. If you head down around Stephenville, which I mentioned in an earlier section, travel a little bit further in past the town, you'll cross into the amazing Port-au-Port Peninsula, and you'll come across this church within a couple of minutes, and it's worth the effort to get out and see. Now for this last section, this is kind of like the miscellaneous section. I call it Curiosities because there's a lot of different types of things on here. I haven't been to Lansom Meadows. That's the Viking site on the tip of the Great Northern Peninsula. That would kind of fit into this like Curiosities section. But I'm going to start just outside the town of Twillingate in the town of Herring Neck. This old sort of rundown building. This is an example of one of these things that you may notice if you're in the area, but you may not know the history of it. This has an incredible history. It was the site of one of the most important events, in my opinion, that has ever taken place in Newfoundland. Please go ahead and Google it if you want. It's the Loyal Orange Lodge in the town of Herring Neck, related to the FPU. That's the event that I feel like this is a very important building because of. Now, Joey's Head. I don't know the place itself is called Joey's Lookout, and there's a beautiful lookout there, and I don't want to knock that, but I will say that there's so many beautiful lookouts around Newfoundland. The reason why I want you to pull over on the highway into the parking lot where Joey's Head is because of Joey's Head. It's a remarkable homage to this megalomaniac that you're going to have Joey's Lookout being overshadowed by this weird picture of this weird man's weird head. Smuggler's Cove in the town, or just outside the town of Burin on the Burin Peninsula. I have made a full video about the place, which I'll link somewhere up here. Go pay a visit. If you are on a road trip around the Burin Peninsula, this is what this place is for. It's an authentic roadhouse with an excellent restaurant, a cool location. Smuggler's Cove. I can't say enough good things about it. Now, staying on the Burin Peninsula is one of the coolest things that literally nobody else in Canada can say is we share a border with France. Yes, 20% of Canada speaks French, but nobody in Quebec or in New Brunswick can claim to be on a border with France. We can. This is the border to St. Pierre and Miquelon from the town of Fortune on the Burin Peninsula. Heading over to Harbor Grace, there's two different sites that are right next to each other. There's a site of the Amelia Earhart statue and memorial that's relevant because this is a site where Amelia Earhart took one of her very famous flights from. And then just in the water beyond there is where the SS Kyle drifted and sort of ran aground back in the 1960s, and it's been there ever since. And this is pretty cool. Very significant supply ship for Newfoundland's offshore fishery over the years. This is its final resting ground, and it's been repaired and deteriorated a few times, and I hope that there's a way to maintain this before it just falls apart. But you can see the ship where it rests right now in the basically the end of the harbor at Harbor Grace. Now, there's lots of shipwrecks located around the island of Newfoundland, and there's one more significant one not that far from Harbor Grace, just up the road actually in Conception Harbor. It's the whaling ships. There's 3 of them. One of them still sticks out of the water a little bit more, but if you fly over it, you can see that there's 2 more that are kind of overgrown with seaweed or whatever it is. But same thing with the SS Kyle and Harbor Grace. They just kind of like broke off of their moorings and ran aground where they did, and this is where they will be forever until they completely deteriorate now. Now, this one's kind of easy. Jelly Bean Row. There's nothing like this that I know of in Canada on the scale that this is on. And it's not the only seaside town in the world that has brightly colored houses, but there's still something unique about the St. John's downtown with Jelly Bean Row. Definitely noticeable if you're in the city, of course, in the downtown area. So walk around one of the many brightly colored row house streets in St. John's. There's not an individual row of jelly bean houses. It's just what we call the brightly colored downtown district of St. John's. Gander Airport you may know because of the famous Come From Away story, and rightly so. But I'm putting the Gander Airport in this section here because I just really like the building, the main waiting room area, which was built a long time ago. This was actually one of the most important airports in the world for a time, but they've kind of restored the main waiting room area to reflect what it used to look like, and it's just such a nice place. It just kind of looks like you've stepped back in a movie from the 1950s or 60s, the way that airports are portrayed in those old movies. Just north of the town of Carbonear is the town of Victoria, and they have the Heritage Village there. The Heritage Village is, kind of like a pioneer village. They have some cool stuff built. It's for fun. It wasn't actually like this back in the day on the site, because the actual history is what makes it so fascinating to me. The actual history of this specific location is this was a real prisoner of war site during World War II. So you can go and enjoy the site for what it is now. Absolutely, it's cool. I really liked it. But just knowing what the site was before, going back 80 years now, that's what really grabbed my attention. Right? I think it's worth going to see for what it is now, but also knowing what you're walking on, what it used to be, what people used to walk on there. Right? Now, staying in Carbonear, I'm going to recommend just taking a jaunt through Water Street on Carbonear. This was redone recently. They did a big dig, repairing like the sewer pipes and stuff, but they redid the street recently. And as far as I understand, the repairs are done and the street's back open for business. But the businesses that are on the street, that's the cool thing. This is like an old downtown of a pretty small town. The Carbonear is on the bigger side of towns for Newfoundland in terms of population, but it's still a small town. But they have a cool little downtown with restaurants and shops, and there's one of the shops there is actually ran by somebody named Mark Royal, which I thought was pretty cool. Definitely worth visiting. Carbonear is not that far from St. John's, so if you want to get out of town, if you can't go too far, go to Carbonear, go to Water Street, go to that Heritage Village that I just mentioned a moment ago. And there's lots of other stuff. The Harbor Grace stuff that I mentioned, Harbor Grace is right next to Carbonear. There's kind of a lot there. This is an area of the province that I think there's a lot of cool stuff around there. So if you're there, stop by Water Street for your lunch or for your coffee or for whatever it is you're looking for. Now, if you are in Carbonear or in Victoria, if you hop across on the other side of that Bay de Verde Peninsula, you'll end up over around Cavendish. Well, you end up in Heart's Content, which I mentioned earlier as well. But if you drive south of there, you'll end up in the town of Cavendish. And there's these 3 fishing sheds that are there. And I don't know if they were put there for tourism purposes, if they were there on this beach and then they just got spruced up. But there's a very famous photo of these sheds in the Newfoundland and Labrador tourism ads from a long time ago now. And I just really like them. I can't explain why. I just think they're cool, and it's a cool spot to stop and just get out of your car and take a few pictures. So it's the town of Cavendish, it's the fishing sheds. There's actually one of the sheds is a library, and I think there's other things in the other ones where you can go inside and see inside. But it's just a nice spot to get out and stretch and take some nice photos. Now head down to Placentia. I haven't mentioned much about this area of the Avalon Peninsula, sort of the southwest of the Cape Shore area. Now, Placentia is a little bit before the Cape Shore, but Placentia is home to a lift bridge that I don't think there's any other bridges like this in Newfoundland. And it's a beautiful town. I've talked about it in other videos, but the curiosity aspect for this section is that bridge. It's just something that really stands out and dominates the skyline of this little town. And you should go to Placentia for any number of reasons, Castle Hill, the town itself, but the bridge sort of stands out. You'll notice it if you're there, so I wanted to include this in this video. Port Rexton is a beautiful town on the Bonavista Peninsula. I've talked about a few other towns just for the sake of them being beautiful, but Port Rexton is interesting to me because it has a thriving, very, very healthy brewery, the Port Rexton Brewery. And this is the type of place where you'll find Port Rexton beer all around Newfoundland, but the brewery itself stays open throughout the year as far as I know, and it's busy. I've been there in the summer, but I've been there in the off season as well, and it'd be surprised at how busy it can be because it's in the middle of a very, very small town. But it's cool to see, rural Newfoundland, and in the town of Port Rexton there's a few other things like this as well, where there's people taking chances on businesses that seem to be doing well, right? So Bonavista Peninsula in general is an example of this, but Port Rexton in particular with the brewery and with the Fisher's Loft and a few other businesses like that, really cool thing to see. So if you managed to stick with me this long, I just want to say thank you. I know this was a beast of a video. I covered a lot of topics in really high level, and I didn't get into much detail with anything because I wanted to squeeze everything in. So hopefully you did make notes, or hopefully you can refer back to the individual items that I numbered for you. But hopefully it helps. And if you're actually preparing a trip to Newfoundland, or if you're looking for road trip ideas, hopefully this helps. But if you're looking for technical advice on logistical things to travel around Newfoundland, I'm going to share this video over here with you. Hopefully you can take a look at that one, because Newfoundland is not only unique because of the landscapes and the things you'll see and the places you'll go, but how you need to prepare to travel around it. So really appreciate you for watching this one. I'll see you over in that one. See you, loves you, bye.